The Final Rebellion. Chapter 1. A City of Contrasts. The early morning light spilled over Paris, illuminating its timeless cobblestone streets and ornate iron balconies. The hum of life was already beginning. Street vendors setting up stalls, bicycles weaving through pedestrians, and the faint aroma of freshly baked baguettes drifting through the crisp air. It was a city that seemed alive, pulsating with stories in every corner. Yet, for Jad, this vibrancy only heightened his sense of detachment. Jad sat by the fogged window of a modest café on Rue Saint-Antoine, his dark eyes fixed on the street below. His unkempt chestnut hair fell across his forehead, giving him an air of casual indifference. Dressed in a simple black sweater and jeans, he blended into the anonymity of Paris, a young man of 27, just another face in a sea of people. But beneath his calm exterior lay a deep well of disillusionment. Originally from a rural village in the south of France, Jad had moved to Paris 5 years ago, chasing the promise of a more fulfilling life. Yet, the city's endless noise and movement only made him feel more adrift. Chapter 2. Sarah. Jad's apartment was as unassuming as he was. Situated on the 5th floor of an old Haussmannian building, it was small, almost claustrophobic, with a single window overlooking a narrow alley. The furnishings were sparse: a battered wooden table, a bookshelf half filled with philosophy books, and a worn-out armchair. A pot of wilt-in plants on the windowsill seemed to mirror Jad's apathy. As the clock struck 10, a knock echoed through the quiet apartment. It was Sarah. Sarah entered with an air of warmth that seemed to brighten the dimly lit room. Her long, wavy, honey-colored hair fell effortlessly over her shoulders, and her hazel eyes carried a softness that contrasted sharply with Jad's detached demeanor. She wore a beige trench coat and carried a canvas bag filled with oranges, her small way of bringing color and life to Jad's monochrome world. "You didn't answer my call," she said, setting the bag down on the table. Her voice was gentle, but there was an undercurrent of frustration. "I didn't feel like talking," Jad replied, his tone flat. He leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, as if shielding himself from her energy. Sarah sighed, pulling out a chair opposite him. "You can't keep shutting the world out, Jad. It's not healthy." Jad raised an eyebrow, a faint smirk tugging at the corner of his lips. "The world doesn't care about me, Sarah. Why should I care about it?" "Because it's not about the world, it's about you," she said earnestly. Her hands rested on the table, palms open, as if pleading with him to understand. "Happiness doesn't come from what's outside. It comes from how you see what you have. Look at the people in the countryside, Jad. They have so little, yet they smile. They thank God for every sunrise, every meal. That's happiness." Jad shook his head, his smirk fading. "That's delusion. They're smiling because they've convinced themselves there's meaning in the meaningless. Life is absurd, Sarah. The sooner we accept that, the freer we'll be." "Free?" Sarah leaned forward, her hazel eyes searching his. "You call this freedom? Living in a cage you built yourself? You refuse to let anything in. Faith, love, hope. You think rejecting everything makes you strong, but it doesn't. It makes you lonely." "I'm not lonely," Jad said, though his voice wavered. He looked away, his gaze fixed on the peeling paint of the wall. "I'm realistic. I'd rather face the truth than cling to comforting lies." "And what truth is that?" Sarah asked softly. that life has no meaning, that we're just specks in an indifferent universe, and the only real freedom is to live without illusions. Sarah sat back, folding her arms. Maybe you're right, Jad. Maybe life is meaningless. But if that's true, then why not create your own meaning? Why not choose to find joy even if it's fleeting? Isn't that what bravery really is? Jad didn't respond immediately. He stared at the table, tracing the grain of the wood with his finger. Joy feels temporary, he said finally, like it slips through your fingers the moment you grasp it. Maybe it does, Sarah admitted. But isn't that what makes it precious? Knowing it won't last forever? The bad news. Their conversation lingered in the air, raw and unresolved, as Sarah stood to leave. She reached for her trench coat, her fingers lingering on the lapel. "I hope you think about what I said," she murmured, her voice soft. Jad nodded absently, his gaze returning to the window. "I will," he said, though his tone lacked conviction. Just as Sarah opened the door to leave, Jad's phone buzzed on the table. He picked it up, glancing at the unfamiliar number. "Hello?" he answered, his voice guarded. The line crackled briefly before a measured voice spoke. "Mr. Harper? This is Inspector Renault from your hometown. I'm sorry to inform you that your parents were involved in a car accident earlier today. They didn't make it." Jad froze. The words hung in the air like an echo, reverberating in the quiet room. Sarah turned back, her eyes wide with concern, as she took in the pale, stunned expression on his face. "Jad," she asked gently, stepping closer. "What's wrong?" He dropped the phone onto the table, his hand trembling slightly. "It's my parents," he said, his voice hollow. "They're gone." For a moment, neither of them spoke. The weight of the news settled between them, heavy and suffocating. Sarah reached out, placing a hand on his shoulder, but Jad barely noticed. His mind was a whirlwind of fragmented thoughts, memories of his childhood home flashing before his eyes. Yet, even now, he couldn't summon the sadness he knew he should feel. Instead, there was only a gnawing emptiness, a void that seemed to grow with each passing second. Sarah's voice broke through the silence. "Jad, I'm so sorry. This is terrible. Do you want to sit down? Talk about it?" He looked at her, his dark eyes distant and unreadable. Slowly, he shook his head. "It doesn't matter," he said, his voice steady but detached. "We all end up there eventually. Whether today, tomorrow, or years from now, it's the same result." The cold finality of his words made Sarah shiver. She opened her mouth to respond, to say something, anything, but she stopped, realizing that there was nothing she could say to reach him in that moment. Jad turned back to the window, his gaze fixed on the bustling street below, where life carried on as if nothing had happened. For a fleeting moment, a faint smirk tugged at his lips. It's just one more absurdity in a world full of them. Chapter 3. I Can't Breathe. The law firm of DuPont and Associates hummed with quiet efficiency that morning. The rhythmic click of keyboards and the soft rustle of papers filled the air. Jad sat at his desk, flipping through a stack of case files with the practiced indifference of someone who had mastered the art of appearing busy. His black suit was slightly crumpled, his tie loosely knotted as though he had dressed in a hurry. Across from him, Nicola, his colleague and fellow trainee, was meticulously organizing her documents, her neatness a stark contrast to Jad's nonchalance. "Morning, Jad," Nicola said, glancing up with a polite smile. Morning, Nicola, Jad replied, his tone flat but not unfriendly. Ready to conquer another day of justice? Nicola chuckled softly, rolling her eyes. Justice or bureaucracy? Sometimes I can't tell the difference. Jad smirked. A fine line, isn't it? As Nicola scribbled a note in her planner, she glanced at him with a hesitant expression. By the way, Jad, I heard about your parents. I'm so sorry for your loss. It must be a lot to deal with. Jad's pen paused briefly against the page, but his face remained impassive. Without looking up, he replied, There's nothing to deal with. They're gone, and life goes on. Nicola frowned, her brows knitting together. But still, Jad, losing both parents like that, it's natural to feel grief, isn't it? Jad finally looked up, his dark eyes meeting hers with a faint hint of amusement. Is it? People die every day, Nicola. My parents weren't any different from the rest. It's not like feeling sad will change anything. Nicola's mouth opened slightly in disbelief, but she chose not to press the matter. She shook her head, muttering, You're impossible sometimes. Before Jad could respond, the door creaked open. Both of them looked up to see an old woman hesitantly stepping into the office. She was in her 70s, her back slightly hunched, and her hands clutching a worn leather handbag. Her gray hair was neatly pinned back, and her eyes, though tired, shone with a determined light. Good morning, she began, her voice trembling but clear. I need to speak to someone about my son. Nicola immediately rose from her desk, her warm smile putting the woman at ease. Of course, madam. Please, have a seat. She gestured to the chair across from their desks. Thank you, the old woman said, lowering herself into the chair with care. Her hands trembled slightly as she placed her bag on her lap. My name is Marie. My son, Antoine, has been accused of theft. They say he stole jewelry from his employer, but I swear he didn't do it. Antoine is a good man, always has been. He's worked for the same family for 20 years. He would never do such a thing. Nicola leaned forward, her expression sympathetic. That sounds difficult, Mrs. Marie. Did Antoine explain what happened? Marie nodded quickly. He says it's all a misunderstanding. The jewelry was found in his locker, but he swears he didn't put it there. Someone must have framed him. He's always been an honest worker. Everyone in our neighborhood knows him, and they'll all vouch for his character. Nicola nodded, her brow furrowing. It sounds like we'll need to gather evidence to prove his innocence. Does Antoine have any idea who might want to frame him? Marie hesitated, then shook her head. No, he doesn't. He thinks it might be someone at work who's jealous of him, but he can't be sure. As Nicola continued to ask questions, Jad leaned back in his chair, watching the exchange with a faintly amused expression. Finally, he spoke up, his tone light but cutting. Well, Mrs. Marie, he began, I hate to be the one to say it, but isn't it possible that Antoine isn't as perfect as you think? Sometimes people surprise us. Marie's eyes widened, and her grip on her bag tightened. You don't know my son, she said, her voice rising slightly. He would never... Jad raised a hand, cutting her off. I'm just saying, if the jewelry was in his locker, the police will consider that evidence. Innocent or not, it's going to be hard to convince a court otherwise. Jad, Nicola interjected, glaring at him. That's uncalled for. Jad shrugged, unbothered by Nicola's disapproval. I'm just being realistic. Sympathy doesn't win cases. Facts do. Marie looked at Jad, her face a mixture of hurt and indignation, before turning back to Nicola. "Can you help me?" she asked softly. Nicola nodded firmly, ignoring Jad's presence entirely. "We'll do everything we can, Mrs. Marie. I'll need some more details to start building a case. Let's take this one step at a time." Marie nodded gratefully, her voice barely above a whisper. "Thank you." Jad returned to his files, a faint smirk playing on his lips as he avoided Nicola's reproachful glare. For him, this was just another absurd situation in a world where right and wrong were blurred. The air in the office grew tense as Nicola's voice cut through the strained silence. She looked directly at Jad, her usually warm demeanor replaced by visible frustration. "If you continue this way, customers will run away from us, Jad," she said sharply. "And then what? We'll be out of work." Jad leaned back in his chair, his fingers idly tapping the edge of his desk. "It's not like I said anything untrue," he replied, his tone casual. Nicola's eyes narrowed. "It's not just about being true. Since when does being realistic mean being cruel? Where did all this meanness come from, Jad? And to whom?" "To a sad, broken mother, begging for help for her son." For a moment, the room fell silent. Even Marie, who had been clutching her bag tightly, looked at Jad with a mixture of confusion and expectation. Jad sighed heavily, his gaze dropping to the desk as he laced his fingers together. "You want to know where it comes from?" Jad asked, his voice quieter than usual. He looked up at Nicola, his dark eyes filled with an emotion she couldn't quite place. "It comes from watching two people give their entire lives to something that never gave back. My parents worked themselves to the bone on a little farm, Nicola. They dreamed of giving me a better life, one where I wouldn't have to scrape by like they did. And what did they get for it?" He laughed bitterly. "A worn-out house, debts they couldn't repay, and a son who barely made it to Paris to find this glamorous office job." Nicola softened, her annoyance giving way to sympathy. "Jad, this is not an excuse." "But you know what's funny?" Jad interrupted, leaning forward now. His expression darkened, his lips curling into a faint, sardonic smile. "They died, Nicola. Just like that. In the end, all their struggles meant nothing. They're gone, and the farm is probably a pile of rubble by now. So, forgive me if I don't have the patience to entertain comforting lies. Sympathy doesn't fix problems. Harsh truths do." Nicola and Marie stared at him, both struck silent by his words. For a brief moment, Jad's raw honesty and the weight of his past hung heavy in the room. But just as quickly as the vulnerability had surfaced, it vanished, replaced by his usual detachment. Jad leaned back again, crossing his arms as his smirk returned. "Besides," he added lightly, "I think Mrs. Marie here can handle it. She seems tougher than most." Marie blinked, taken aback but unsure how to respond. Nicola, however, wasn't having it. "You're unbelievable," Nicola muttered, shaking her head. "You go from being human for 2 seconds to making the rest of us regret it." "That's the trick," Jad said with a shrug, his smirk deepening. "Life is easier when you stop pretending it's anything more than a bad joke." Marie stood slowly, gripping her bag with trembling hands. I'll wait for your call, miss," she said softly to Nicola, who nodded sympathetically. As Marie left the office, Nicola turned to Jad with a look of disbelief. "You know, for someone who claims to believe in harsh truths, you sure seem to enjoy hiding behind them." Jad chuckled, unbothered by the remark. "Maybe, but hiding works better than believing in fairy tales. Nicholas sighed, rubbing her temples in exasperation. I honestly don't know whether to feel sorry for you or slap you. Go with pity, Jad said, picking up his pen again. It's easier. Jad's escape. The office felt suffocating, a prison of fluorescent lights and the endless scratching of pens against paper. Jad couldn't bear it any longer. Rising abruptly from his chair, he grabbed his coat and muttered something about needing air, leaving Nicola to shake his head in silent disapproval. The streets of Paris welcomed him with their familiar chaos. Cobblestones glistened under the faint drizzle, and the scent of rain mixed with the aroma of freshly baked bread wafting from nearby boulangeries. Yet, even the city's charm felt hollow to Jad. The narrow alleys and bustling squares that once stirred his imagination now seemed like a labyrinth designed to mock him. He wandered aimlessly, letting his feet guide him. The chatter of street vendors and the laughter of tourists became a distant hum as he turned down quieter streets. It was there, in the dim light of a corner cafe, that he spotted her, Sarah. Jad leaned against the weathered stone wall of a narrow alley, his silhouette blending into the shadows cast by dim street lights. From his pocket, he pulled a crumpled pack of cigarettes, the last one bent slightly at the edge. He straightened it with care, lit it with a flick of his lighter, and took a long, deliberate drag. The smoke curled around him like a restless ghost, a faint barrier between himself and the world beyond. The cafe was lively, its warm golden light spilling onto the wet cobblestones. Inside, Sarah sat across from a young man, blonde, impeccably dressed, and exuding an effortless charm. Their conversation was animated, punctuated by bursts of laughter that carried faintly through the chilled air. Sarah's smile was radiant, her hazel eyes shimmering with an openness that felt both familiar and distant. Jad tilted his head, his dark, sardonic eyes narrowing as he observed them from the shadows. His lips twisted into a bitter smile, one corner curling upward as if in mockery of the scene before him. He took another drag, the cigarette glowing brighter, the ember briefly illuminating his face. So, he muttered under his breath, his voice low and edged with venom. This is contentment. This is simplicity. The great wisdom you preached, wrapped up in blonde hair and a tailored coat. He chuckled softly, though the sound lacked humor. It was more a release of pent-up disillusionment, a quiet rebellion against the sting of betrayal. His gaze lingered on Sarah, her honey-colored hair cascading over her shoulders, her velvety skin glowing in the cafe's warm light. She looked serene, untroubled, as though she hadn't spent countless nights lecturing him about the virtues of gratitude and the beauty of finding joy in the mundane. All your talk about inner peace, about appreciating the little things, he murmured, his tone dripping with sarcasm. Was that for my benefit, Sarah? Or for yours? Was I the broken project you wanted to mend, or just a stepping stone to someone who fits your narrative better? He exhaled sharply, the smoke escaping his lips like an unspoken scream. His eyes darted to the blond man, who leaned in closer, his expression a mixture of intrigue and admiration. Jad's smile deepened, the bitterness in it sharp enough to cut. Really, Sarah? Even you are an illusion like the rest, he whispered. I didn't know you had a preference for golden-haired simplicity. The cafe's warmth seemed stifling now, a stark contrast to the cold rain beginning to drizzle from the Parisian sky. Jad felt the chill seep through his coat, but it was nothing compared to the hollow ache in his chest. Still, his expression remained calm, even amused, though the cigarette in his hand trembled slightly. "What did you want from me, Sarah?" he asked aloud, his voice barely audible over the soft patter of rain. "To save me? To fix me? To fill your need for purpose by trying to make me believe in your illusions?" The words hung in the air, unanswered, swallowed by the hum of the street and the muted clinking of glasses from the cafe. Jad flicked the ash from his cigarette, watching it fall to the wet ground like the remnants of his fading faith in her sincerity. He stood there for a while longer, watching the scene like an actor observing a play he'd been cut from. The laughter, the smiles, the intimate glances, it all felt orchestrated, a hollow performance in the theater of life. With a final drag, he stubbed the cigarette under his heel and stepped away from the wall. The ember extinguished with a faint hiss, leaving only a faint trail of smoke curling upward before vanishing into the night. All of it, he muttered to himself as he walked away, the cafe shrinking behind him. Contentment, simplicity, happiness. It's all just illusions. Sarah, you're no different. You're just like everything else in this absurd little world. The streets of Paris stretched before him, narrow and winding, their damp surfaces gleaming faintly in the sparse streetlight. He walked without direction, his hands shoved deep into his coat pockets, his thoughts a tangled web of sarcasm and melancholy. Somewhere behind him, the cafe buzzed on, oblivious to his departure, just as the world always seemed oblivious to the weight he carried. An encounter in the rain. The rain fell relentlessly, its rhythm a steady percussion against the cobblestones of Paris. Jad's cigarette had long burned out, but he still held it between his fingers as he wandered aimlessly through the labyrinthine streets. His jacket, thin and old, did little to keep the rain from seeping through to his skin. He didn't care. Let the rain soak him. Perhaps it would wash away this bitterness that seemed to cling to him like a second skin. As he turned a corner, a small figure caught his eye, a boy no older than 10, clutching a bundle of newspapers under one arm. He was pressed against the side of a building, seeking shelter from the downpour. The boy's clothes were too light for the weather, and about half the newspapers in his bundle were wet, their ink smudged into unreadable patches. Yet, despite the cold and the rain, the boy's face was lit with a curious kind of joy. The boy noticed Jad and darted toward him. "Mister," he called out, his voice thin but cheerful, "you don't mind me standing here, do you?" Jad raised an eyebrow and looked down at the boy, taking in his bright eyes and chattering teeth. "Stand where you want, kid," he said, his voice flat. "The rain doesn't care, and neither do I." The boy laughed, a sound so light and carefree that it seemed to mock the storm around them. "Thanks. I just need a break before I head home. These newspapers won't sell like this anyway." Jad smirked, glancing at the soggy stack. "You're optimistic if you think anyone would pay for that mess." The boy shrugged, hugging the dry half of the bundle closer. "Maybe. I just like being out here. The rain's kind of nice, don't you think?" Jad looked at the boy as if he'd spoken a foreign language. "Nice? It's cold, miserable, and ruining your papers." "Yeah, but it makes everything clean again," the boy said, grinning. He tilted his face up toward the sky, letting the raindrops fall on his cheeks. "And it smells good, like the whole city is new." Jad let out a short, sarcastic laugh. "So, You're a philosopher now, are you? Tell me, Socrates, does the rain also pay for your dinner? The boy didn't flinch at the remark. Instead, he looked at Jad with something that resembled pity. Nah, but my mom says dinner tastes better after a good day of work, even if it's just soup. And I like my work. You meet all kinds of people selling newspapers. Some are grumpy. Some are kind. Everyone's got a story. Jad stared at him, caught off guard by the simple sincerity of the words. For a moment, he didn't know what to say. The boy's optimism was foreign to him, alien even, but it wasn't annoying. It was unsettling, like a melody he couldn't place, but couldn't ignore. You don't look like the kind of kid who's had it easy, Jad said finally, his voice softer now. What's there to be so happy about? The boy shrugged again, his small shoulders rising and falling under the weight of the newspapers. I don't know. I guess. I'm just happy to be here. The rain will stop, the sun will come out, and I'll dry off. That's enough, isn't it? Jad felt a strange tightness in his chest, something he couldn't name. He turned away, lighting another cigarette to mask his discomfort. The boy's words lingered, refusing to be drowned out by the rain or the smoke. Well, kid, don't let the rain fool you, Jad said, his voice sharp again. It doesn't make the city new. It just hides the dirt for a while. The boy tilted his head, considering Jad's words. Maybe, but isn't that better than nothing? Before Jad could answer, the boy shifted his bundle of newspapers and gave him a small, awkward salute. Thanks for letting me share your spot, mister. See you around. And just like that, he was gone, disappearing into the storm with his bundle of half-ruined papers. Jad stood there for a long time, the rain dripping from his hair and sliding down his neck. He felt no warmth, no cleansing, only the weight of the boy's simple joy pressing against his chest. Jad flicked his cigarette to the ground and watched as the rain extinguished it. Better than nothing, he muttered to himself, his tone a mixture of scorn and something unrecognizable, like a shadow of hope he wasn't ready to acknowledge. He turned and walked away, the boy's laughter echoing faintly in his mind as he disappeared into the narrow streets once more. Jad stood frozen for a moment, staring at the spot where the boy had just been. The rain continued its steady rhythm, drenching his hair and rolling down his face like unwelcome tears. He reached into his pocket for another cigarette, but his fingers trembled as he tried to light it. Finally, the flame caught, and he inhaled deeply, the smoke curling around him like a shroud. I was a happy child once, he murmured aloud, his voice barely audible over the rain. Like him, full of stupid, simple joy. His lips twisted into a bitter smile as he looked at the flickering glow of the cigarette in his hand. When did I die? He asked the night, his voice low and rasping, as if the words were being dragged from some dark corner of his soul. He stared at the glowing end of his cigarette, watching as the ash crumbled and fell. No, to be more precise, he continued, his voice now almost philosophical. When was I alive? The question hung in the air, unanswered, as the rain dripped from the edge of his jacket. He let out a hollow laugh, the sound swallowed by the emptiness around him. Shaking his head, he flicked the cigarette into a puddle and watched, as the water snuffed out the last ember of light. Jad shoved his hands deep into his pockets and began walking again, his shoulders hunched against the cold. The boy's laughter, the innocent joy in his eyes, played on a loop in Jad's mind. It wasn't just annoying, It was haunting, like a mirror reflecting something he'd long buried, something he didn't want to see. "When was I alive?" he whispered again, his breath misting in the cold air. And for the first time in years, he didn't have an answer. Wandering through the rain. The rain persisted, drumming steadily against the cobblestones of Paris as Jod trudged forward, his coat soaked through and clinging to his skin. The city's vibrant heart faded behind him, replaced by the quiet outskirts where the streets grew narrower, the buildings shorter, and the air colder. Each step felt heavier, the weight of his drenched clothes and thoughts dragging him down. The street lamps cast dim halos in the mist, their light barely penetrating the gloom. In the distance, a cat scurried into the shadows, startled by Jad's approach. Jad lit another cigarette, shielding the flame from the rain with trembling fingers. He inhaled deeply, the smoke swirling with the cold air as he exhaled. His mind was a haze, oscillating between bitter sarcasm and an unsettling emptiness. As he walked, the rain intensified, pooling in uneven cobblestones and seeping into his boots. He passed shuttered shops, their windows reflecting his gaunt figure. Occasionally, a lone passer-by would glance at him before hurrying on, their umbrellas forming small islands of shelter in the downpour. Jad's lips curled into a faint, humorless smile as he muttered to himself, "The city of light. All it does is show how little it matters where you are. Rain falls everywhere." His steps led him farther, past the boundaries of familiarity, until the streets opened into the countryside's edge. The sounds of the city softened, replaced by the rhythmic patter of rain on leaves and the distant bark of a dog. Fields stretched ahead, shrouded in mist, their earthy scent mixing with the rain. Finally, exhausted and shivering, Jad spotted a small village restaurant with warm light spilling from its windows. The wooden sign above the door swung gently in the breeze, creaking softly. Inside, the faint chatter of voices and the clinking of cutlery beckoned him. Jad hesitated for a moment, glancing back toward the path he had come from. Then, with a resigned sigh, he pushed the door open and stepped inside, leaving the rain and darkness behind. This moment of brief respite would lead him to an encounter that would once again test his precarious grasp on the absurdity of existence. The village restaurant. The restaurant is modest, its wooden beams creaking faintly under the weight of years. A few locals sit scattered at tables, their faces weathered by the simple rhythm of village life. The warm aroma of freshly baked bread and simmering soup offers a fleeting comfort. Jad, drenched from the rain, slumps into a corner seat by the window. The droplets trailing from his coat form small puddles on the floor. A waiter, indifferent to Jad's soaked state, places a bowl of steaming vegetable soup in front of him. Jad begins eating silently, his thoughts still circling the hollow conversations of his life. Moments later, an Arabic man in his early 40s enters, his dark eyes scanning the room for a place to sit. His clothes are worn but clean, his face lined with exhaustion and longing. He notices Jad sitting alone and approaches cautiously. Immigrant, with a soft, hesitant smile. "Excuse me, brother. Mind if I join you? It's crowded tonight." Jad, not even looking up. "It's not crowded. Pick another table." The immigrant glances around. The other tables are occupied by locals who seem less inviting. He decides to sit anyway. Immigrant: "I won't bother you. Just need a seat to eat, that's all." Jad shrugs, continuing to eat. A tense silence hovers between them before the immigrant speaks again. Immigrant. You're not from around here, are you? Jad, dryly. What gave me away? The rainwater dripping off my coat, or the look of existential despair? The immigrant chuckles nervously, taking the sarcasm as a reluctant invitation to talk. Immigrant. I'm not from here either. I came to France a few years ago, fled the war in my country. Thought it would be better here, safer. I promised my family I'd bring them once I settled, but... He trails off, his voice heavy with regret. Immigrant. Life doesn't always work out the way we hope, does it? Jad finally looks up, his eyes cold. Jad. Hope's overrated. It's just a polite way of lying to yourself. Immigrant, ignoring the cynicism. Maybe, but it's all I've got. I promised my wife, my children. They're still there, waiting. Every day I wonder if I'll ever keep that promise. Do you have a family? Jad hesitates, then smirks faintly. Jad. Had one. They're dead now. So, no promises to keep. Just freedom. The immigrant's expression softens with sympathy, but Jad's tone sharpens. Jad. Don't pity me. It's pointless, like everything else. The immigrant sighs, stirring his soup. Immigrant. You're young. Maybe too young to be this bitter. Life is cruel, yes, but it's still life. There's always something to hold on to. Jad, leaning back, his tone dripping with sarcasm. Yes, like an empty promise to bring your family to a land where you can barely afford soup. Inspiring. The words hit the immigrant hard. His grip on the spoon tightens, but he doesn't respond immediately. The tension escalates when the immigrant accidentally nudges Jad's arm while reaching for the salt shaker. Jad, irritated. Watch it. Immigrant, defensive. It's just salt. No need to overreact. Jad, overreact? You've been talking my ear off and now you're spilling my soup? What's next? Taking my seat too. Immigrant, raising his voice. You think you're better than everyone, don't you? Sitting here like the world owes you something. Well, newsflash. No one owes you anything. The argument quickly escalates, attracting the attention of other patrons. Jad, standing abruptly. Maybe no one owes me, but at least I don't live off broken promises and self-pity. The immigrant rose from his seat, his voice trembling with frustration and indignation. Immigrant, you have no idea what I've been through. You sit there, mocking everything, as if none of it matters. Do you even know what it's like to lose everything and still fight to survive? Jad leaned back in his chair, his face set in its usual mask of detached indifference. He flicked ash from his cigarette into the tray, his eyes narrowing slightly. Jad, I know enough to see that fighting doesn't change a thing. Life doesn't reward struggle. It mocks it. Look where all your effort has gotten you. The man's face darkened, and his hands balled into fists on the table. But before he could respond, a voice from another table cut through the tension. Man from the restaurant. Why don't you shut your mouth and go back to where you came from? The immigrant turned to face the speaker, his expression a mix of disbelief and anger. Immigrant. What did you just say? The tension in the room thickened as more patrons began to murmur. One of them stood, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. Second patron, you heard him. Get out of here. Go back to wherever you came from. The immigrant held his ground, refusing to back down, but the air bristled with hostility. A man stepped forward, shoving him roughly. Jad observed the scene unfolding with a strange detachment. He could feel the injustice bubbling around him, but he refused to let it pierce the shield of indifference he wore. He stood, pushed his chair back, and retrieved his coat. "Jad, this is a waste of time." The immigrant turned briefly toward him, his voice desperate. "Immigrant, you're just going to walk away? You sat here, mocking me, and now—" Jad shrugged as he adjusted his coat, cutting the man off mid-sentence. "Jad, I've got no stake in this circus." With that, he turned and strode toward the door, leaving the voices of the escalating argument and the immigrants' protests behind. As the door swung shut behind him, the sound of a scuffle broke out, followed by shouts and the crash of a chair. Jad paused for a moment in the rain, staring into the wet, darkened streets. A fleeting pang of guilt crossed his mind, but was quickly smothered by the fog of detachment. Jad, to himself, "It's not my fight." It never was. The alley encounter. The rain poured steadily as Jad wandered aimlessly through the dark, slick streets. His shoes splashed through puddles, the water soaking into his already damp clothes. He had no destination in mind, only a need to walk, to escape the weight of the restaurant and the immigrant's desperate eyes. He had barely noticed the sound of footsteps behind him until a small voice called out, "Sir! Sir!" Jad stopped and turned, his eyes narrowing in the dim light. A figure emerged from the shadows, a familiar one. The newspaper boy stood there, his coat drenched and clinging to his small frame. His arms were wrapped tightly around his torso, his teeth chattering slightly. Newspaper boy, "Sir, you need to come with me." Jad frowned, his brow furrowing. "Jad, why? What is it this time?" The boy hesitated before taking a step closer, his voice low and urgent. "Newspaper boy, I saw what happened in the restaurant. Those men, they're looking for you." Jad's confusion deepened. "Jad, looking for me? Why?" The boy shook his head, his face pale. "Newspaper boy, the man, the Arab man, he fell. They hit him, and he fell. He's dead." Jad's breath hitched, though his expression remained stoic. "Jad, dead?" He just wanted to talk. He wasn't supposed to die. The boy's eyes glistened with a mixture of fear and concern. "Newspaper boy, they think you were part of it. They're saying you're the reason he got hurt." Jad's lips parted, but no words came. His chest tightened, a strange mix of emotions bubbling beneath his surface. Guilt? Anger? Indifference? It was hard to tell. The boy reached out, tugging lightly at Jad's sleeve. "Newspaper boy, come on, sir. My house is nearby. You can hide there until it's safe." Jad allowed himself to be led, his steps heavy, his mind replaying the scene in the restaurant. He had walked away, left it all behind, and now he was walking again, not toward safety, but deeper into a storm he couldn't quite escape. The silent walk. The boy tugged at Jad's sleeve again, his voice urging him forward. "Newspaper boy, come on, sir. We need to hurry." Jad followed the boy, his steps slow and heavy as the rain poured around them. The cold droplets slid down his face, mixing with the numbness in his chest. The narrow alleyways felt like a labyrinth, closing in around him with every turn. As the boy led him through the maze of wet streets, Jad's mind drifted. Jad, thinking, he just wanted someone to talk to. He asked for nothing but someone to listen to him. That's all he wanted. A few words, a fleeting connection, and yet... He clenched his jaw, the memory of the immigrant's pleading eyes flashing in his mind. There had been desperation there, a raw, naked need that Jad had brushed off as unimportant, even laughable. Jad, thinking, was it his fault? Number. He didn't throw the punches. He didn't shove the man to the ground. He left before it escalated. But still. The boy glanced back at him, his small face pale and concerned. Newspaper boy. Sir? Are you okay? Jad blinked, shaking himself from his thoughts. Jad, I'm fine. The boy didn't seem convinced, but said nothing more. He led Jad through another alley, the sound of the rain muffling their footsteps. Jad's thoughts returned to the restaurant. The immigrant's words echoed in his mind. People like you. You're the real problem. No compassion, no understanding. He lit a cigarette with trembling fingers, the smoke curling around him in the damp air. Jad, thinking, maybe he was right. Maybe people like me are the problem. But what does it matter now? He's dead. Dead, like everyone else eventually will be. Like my parents. Like me. For a brief moment, something unfamiliar stirred within him. A flicker of guilt, or perhaps regret. But it was quickly swallowed by the familiar void, the cold emptiness that had become his constant companion. Jad, thinking, he wanted someone to talk to. I could have been that person. I could have said something. Anything. Instead, I left. I always leave. The boy stopped in front of a small, run-down building and gestured toward the door. Newspaper boy. This is it. We can stay here until things calm down. Jad nodded absently, his mind still caught in the tangled web of his thoughts. As he stepped inside, the boy shut the door behind them, the sound of the rain muffled to a distant patter. The refuge. Newspaper boy. Come inside before someone sees you. Jad hesitates. He doesn't like entering the homes of strangers. It makes him feel like an intruder. But he has nowhere else to go. He steps in. The apartment is small, almost suffocating, yet warm in a way Jad can't define. A single dim light hangs from the ceiling, casting long shadows. A scent of cumin and warm bread lingers in the air. Clothes hang from a string across the room, drying after the rain. Sitting at a wooden table is Amal, the aunt. She is young, mid-20s, with dark, wavy hair tied back neatly. Her deep brown eyes hold both warmth and sharpness, as if she sees through people. She wears a simple black dress, elegant despite its modesty. She carries herself with quiet strength. In the corner, a tired mother, perhaps in her late 30s, rocks a baby in her arms. Two small children, a boy and a girl, peek out from behind her, their wide eyes filled with curiosity. Newspaper boy, to his mother. Ma'am, he needs a place to stay. Boy's mother. Come in, sit. You're safe here. She motioned to a spot near the lamp, where a folded blanket rested. Her voice was calm but firm, the voice of a woman who had learned to endure more than she could express. Newspaper boy. Mama, this is the man I told you about. He was in the restaurant. He saw what happened. Jad lowered himself onto the blanket, his wet clothes clinging to his skin. He felt the weight of the family's gaze upon him. Amal studies Jad, her gaze unreadable. Amal, calmly, to Jad, "You look like trouble." Jad exhales smoke from his cigarette, amused. "Jad, I get that a lot." Amal, "Are you going to tell me why you're here?" Jad doesn't answer immediately. He notices how the mother clutches her baby a little tighter, how the children stare at him as if he's a character from a storybook, a mysterious wanderer from another world. Jad, finally, "I saw a man die tonight." A brief silence. Amal doesn't flinch, but her expression shifts, curious now, rather than wary. Amal, "And did you kill him?" Jad, "No, but I didn't stop it either." Amal nods slowly, as if she understands something unspoken. The shift. The family lets him stay the night. Jad, who never cared for warmth, finds himself in an unfamiliar situation. The home is loud with children's voices, the clatter of dishes, the soft hum of lullabies. He watches as Amal serves dinner, simple lentil soup with bread. She doesn't ask if he's hungry, but she places a bowl in front of him anyway. Amal, "Eat! You look like you haven't in days." Jad stares at the bowl. He isn't sure when he last had a real meal. He takes a spoonful. It's warm, comforting. Jad, "You're wasting food on a stranger." Amal, coolly, "A stranger is just someone whose story you haven't heard yet." Jad scoffs, but doesn't argue. For the first time in a long time, he listens. To the mother whispering prayers over her baby. To Ali playing with his younger siblings. To Amal, moving through the room with quiet authority, her presence commanding but never harsh. These people have nothing, yet they are content. He sees it in their eyes. A midnight conversation. Later that night, when the house is quiet, Amal sits across from Jad. The dim glow of the street lamp outside flickers through the window. Amal, "I can see it in your eyes. You think life is meaningless?" Jad smirks, leaning back against the chair. Jad, "And let me guess, you're going to tell me I'm wrong?" Amal, "I'm going to tell you that life is difficult, and unfair, and cruel. But meaning? Meaning is something you choose." Jad, "Sounds like a pretty illusion." Amal, "Maybe, but illusions are what keep people going." Jad watches her, intrigued. Jad, "You don't seem like the type to believe in fairy tales." Amal, softly, "I believe in survival. I believe in love, in sacrifice. And that's enough." For the first time in years, Jad has no sharp remark, no sarcastic retort. He simply sits in silence. As he lies down on the small mattress Ali offered him, he stares at the ceiling. He should leave. He should turn himself in, make a scene, play the role of the absurd hero. But now, for the first time, he isn't sure. Maybe, just maybe, there's another way. Amal, "What will you do now?" Jad exhaled, closing his eyes for a moment before answering. Jad, I don't know. Maybe I'll keep running. Maybe I'll stop. Does it even matter? Amal. It matters. Everything matters. Even the smallest choices. Jad opened his eyes, turning his head to look at her. She was gazing at him, her expression unreadable. Jad. And what if I don't care? A small, knowing smile touched Amal's lips. Amal. Then why are you still here? Jad had no answer. He turned away, staring at the flickering lamp, feeling something shift inside him. For the first time in a long while, he wasn't sure if he wanted to keep running. Their eyes lock for a moment, an understanding passing between them, unspoken but undeniable. Outside, the rain continues to fall, washing the streets clean. But inside, something stirs, fragile yet powerful. A connection, an unspoken promise, a rebellion not of violence, but of emotion. The sirens grow closer, reminding them of reality. Amal looks away first, busying herself with the tea. Jad watches her, memorizing the way the candlelight dances across her face. He doesn't say it, but he knows. If he ever believed in anything, even for just a moment, it was in this room, in this silence, with her. A silent understanding. Jad had been staying with the boy's family for days now, hiding from the world that was closing in on him. The mother, a kind woman with tired eyes, never asked him questions, never judged. The younger children stared at him in quiet fascination, sensing something different about the man who sat in their small home, always lost in thought. But it was Amal who unsettled him the most. She moved with quiet grace, tending to the house and helping her sister-in-law, the boy's mother. She never addressed him directly unless necessary, yet her presence was undeniable. There was something serene about her, something unshakable. Unlike him, who carried the weight of the world with restless steps and heavy sighs, she walked lightly, as if at peace with everything. Tonight, the air inside the house was thick with silence. The rain outside drummed against the windows, a steady rhythm that filled the empty spaces between words left unsaid. Amal, you don't talk much. Jad looked up from where he sat, his fingers absently tapping against the wooden table. Her voice was soft but firm, like a statement rather than a question. Jad, maybe because I have nothing to say. She studied him for a moment before turning back to the pot she was stirring over the fire. Amal, or maybe because you think no one will understand. He let out a dry chuckle, shaking his head. Jad, understanding is overrated. Everyone wants to fix you, tell you how you should live, how you should feel. But in the end, they just want you to fit into their world, not yours. Amal. And what about you? Do you want to fit anywhere? Jad leaned back in his chair, watching her. Unlike most people he had met, Amal didn't try to impose answers. She simply asked questions, as if leaving the space open for him to decide. Jad, I used to think freedom meant running away. No attachments, no rules, just existing on my own terms. Amal. And now? He exhaled, looking out at the rain. It was strange. For the first time in what felt like forever, he wasn't sure. There was something about this place, about her, that made him question his own convictions. She placed a cup of tea in front of him and sat down across from him. The firelight flickered between them, casting shadows that danced along the walls. Amal, running away is easy. Facing what's inside you, that's the real challenge. He looked at her, searching her face for any sign of judgment, but found none, just quiet certainty. Jad, you talk like you've never doubted anything in your life. Amal, I have, many times, but I found my answers. Jad, and if I never find mine? She smiled, but there was sadness in it. Amal, then maybe you're looking in the wrong places. The conversation faded into silence, but the air between them felt heavier. Unspoken words lingered, emotions neither dared to voice. She stood up, taking the empty cup with her. As she walked away, Jad found himself watching her, a strange pull in his chest. He had lived his life avoiding attachments, convinced they only led to disappointment. But now, in this quiet house, with this quiet woman, something was shifting. Something he wasn't ready to name. Jad spent the next few days watching the family, their small routines, their struggles. He had never cared about domestic life before, had always considered it a trap, but there was something oddly grounding about this household. The way the children laughed, even when there was barely enough food. The way the mother's face softened when she watched them. The way Amal carried her faith and kindness like armor against the world. One afternoon, the boy who had taken him in was struggling with his schoolwork, a worn-out book open before him. Jad hesitated at first, standing at a distance. He had nothing to offer this child. What did he know about responsibility? About helping? But as he saw the boy's frustrated expression, something in him shifted. With a sigh, he sat beside him, guiding him through the pages, explaining what he could. The boy's eyes lit up with understanding, and something unfamiliar settled in Jad's chest. Later that evening, he found himself outside, watching Amal as she carried in the laundry. His hands still ached from helping chop wood earlier. Another thing he had done without thinking. He had never been one to lift a finger for anyone. Yet here he was, hands rough from work, mind tangled with thoughts he couldn't quite untangle. He wasn't sure when he had started to change, or if he wanted to. A glimpse of what could have been. Days passed, and Jad's time in hiding grew shorter. He knew he couldn't stay forever. The world outside was waiting. Justice, or what passed for it, was waiting. One evening, as he sat outside, Amal joined him. The stars stretched endlessly above them, and for a moment the world felt infinite. Amal, do you regret it? Jad, which part? Amal, any of it. He sighed, rubbing his hands together against the chill. Jad, regret is just another way of wishing things were different. And I don't believe in wishes. She looked at him as if seeing something beyond his words. Amal, maybe not wishes, but choices. And you still have one left to make. His throat tightened. He knew what she meant. For the first time in his life, he wasn't running toward chaos. He wasn't lost in absurdity. He was here, in this moment, and the choice before him was clearer than ever. But clarity didn't make it easier. She reached for his hand but stopped just before touching him. A hesitation, a silent confession. And then she pulled away, standing up. Amal, whatever you decide, I hope you find peace. She left him under the stars, alone with the weight of a decision he never thought he'd have to make. An unspoken promise hung in the air between them, a love that had no place in the world they lived in, but existed nonetheless. And for the first time in his life, Jad wished things could have been different. The farewell. The dawn was breaking when Jad made his decision. The night had stretched endlessly, but he had barely closed his eyes. The walls of the small home felt tighter than ever, as if they too knew his time here had come to an end. Amal stood outside, her face bathed in the soft light of the rising sun. She wasn't surprised to see him approach. She had known this moment would come. Jad, I have to go. Amal, I know. The wind carried the scent of wet earth, the remnants of last night's rain still clinging to the air. The village was waking up, unaware that a silent battle was taking place in the space between two people who had never truly voiced what they felt. Jad looked at her, memorizing every detail, the way her dark eyes held steady, the way her hands rested calmly at her sides, as if she had already accepted something he had not. Jad, you're not going to ask me to stay? Amal, would you, if I did? He wanted to say yes. He wanted to lie just for this moment, just to let her believe that things could have been different. But he wasn't a man who believed in illusions, and she wasn't a woman who would fall for them. She took a step closer. Amal, let's switch roles. You wait, and I don't come back. Her words hit him harder than he expected. He had spent his life running from people, abandoning before he could be abandoned. And now she was turning the mirror toward him, showing him what it was like to be left behind. He let out a small, bitter laugh. Jad, that's cruel. Amal, so is life. She reached out, adjusting the collar of his jacket as if to distract herself. It was the only moment of closeness she allowed. When she pulled away, her fingers lingered for the briefest second before retreating. Jad, I'll wait. It was the closest thing to a confession he could give. Amal smiled then, not a smile of joy, but one of quiet understanding. Amal, no, you won't. And with that, she turned and walked away. Jad stood there, watching her disappear into the waking village. He could have called out, could have run after her, could have done something, anything. But he didn't. Instead, he let the moment pass, just like all the others before it. And for the first time in his life, he realized what it meant to truly lose something. The final rebellion. The city felt different in the early morning, quieter, almost indifferent, as if it didn't care whether Jad was here or not. The streets, slick with last night's rain, glistened under the dull glow of streetlights, flickering off as dawn settled in. Jad walked with steady steps, his hands buried deep in his pockets. His mind was silent now, emptied of questions, emptied of escape routes. He had spent his life resisting, running, fighting against everything and nothing at once. But now, there was nowhere left to go. He thought of the boy, his mother, the small house that smelled of warmth and bread. He thought of Amal, her voice, her certainty, her final words. Taking a deep breath, he stepped forward. He had a choice. He could have stayed. No one was chasing him anymore. Amal had forgiven him. Even the city had moved on. He could have stayed. But staying would have meant forgetting. And forgetting meant betraying something deeper, something he couldn't name, but felt in his bones. He didn't kill the man, but he was part of the storm that did. His silence, his anger, his words, all of it was still echoing in that alley. So he walked away. Not because he was running, but because he couldn't pretend. That was his rebellion. Not against the world, but against himself. Against the part of him that longed to bury the past, to pretend nothing happened, to love without guilt. His final rebellion was to carry the weight, even when he didn't have to. And Amal watched him disappear into the distance, without chains, without punishment. Just a man who chose truth over comfort. Just a man who knew that freedom sometimes means walking away from everything you love.